Joining us is Duraini Baharudin, the Managing Director of Value Partners Asset Management Malaysia. Ifran Tarmizi, the CEO of Global Sedekah. Indrawati Selvaraja, the co-founder of Pay Halal and the Executive Director and General Counsel of Suka Fintech, Sendirian Berhad. Thank you, panel, for taking the time to join us for this conversation very late in the afternoon. Start with Nuraini. I can't help myself. I have to make some mention. Yesterday, Value Partners launched or listed their ETF, Shariah 100 China A shares ETF. And of course, I've been looking at the prices. It's quite quite interesting. This is the thing that I want to touch about in this session, because as we explore the opportunities and the potential of the Islamic finance industry, one question that needs to be asked is, of course, whether or not product innovation come in handy and become a little bit of a safety net for the industry. Duran, maybe you can share some ideas on this.
Definitely. Thank you, Ibrahim Sani. Good afternoon and Assalamualaikum to all. Thank you for having me on this session today. So yeah, when it comes to product innovation, I think that is definitely the function of it, right? Innovating products, be it investment products or financial instruments, are all in the interest of ensuring that the industry will continue to evolve at a very safe or competitive environment. For instance, back in the days, we only have things that we call unit trust. That is what most investors in Malaysia are familiar with. Unit trust products that focuses on Islamic products or ESG or even single market funds. Now, how it has evolved over time is that eventually you have other products that comes in to supplement the availability of these products in the industry and therefore makes the landscape more competitive. Now, the question is, who does that benefit? Does it benefit issuers or does it benefit investors? Naturally, you will see that there will be adjustment to pricing fees. And who does that benefit in the end of the day? It actually benefits investors. Now, what this also does is that it's not just looking at it from a fee or revenue driving perspective, it's also driving agenda. So about 10 years ago, you probably don't hear much about Sharia compliant investments, or more than 10 years ago, you don't hear much about Sharia compliant investments in the market. In fact, Malaysia is one of the most advanced market when it comes to Sharia products, be it banking products or products in the capital markets. Now, the innovation has come two ways. One, from the regulatory perspective, the regulators have provided ample regulations or guidelines to guide issuers like ourselves. And also it comes from the investors as well. Investors are asking for products that align more with either their faith or their principles. And this is how you see product innovation actually driving industry or providing a safety net to the industry, because it continues to remain relevant to the end investor. And we as issuers, like value partners, we have to continuously innovate and evolve to adapt to these changes.
Talking about adapting to changes, a lot of technology is being used. In fact, this very conference is done virtually, and before you know it, we're into the second year running. Where does the time fly? It's always something that I always ask. I want to move on to Indra right now, because one of the items that perhaps could be touched by you is, of course, technology. Do you think that the advent of technology, the adoption of it, could benefit the economic recovery? We've seen how the technology adoption is growing rapidly across all sectors and across all age groups in particular. Where do you think the element of technology can help bring about further growth in the Islamic finance sector?
So yeah, for technology, I believe that when we first came in, we wanted to serve the underserved Muslim consumers. We found that there was a void in about 70% of our halal global suppliers, manufacturers, retailers are on non-Muslims. And it's coupled as well with the fact that the uncertainty if you buy processed food or meat, let's say from a foreign country, like say China, all right? And the halal certification could be a bit questionable. So we felt that it was our responsibility, and we wanted to actually contribute in that sense, whereby transactions or purchases of goods and services would not be haram. So at the same time, religious conservatism is also taking hold. We saw a great shift in terms of employees choosing to work in companies that practice Sharia management standards, employees choosing EPF, Islamic savings schemes. So it proves the rediscovery of Islam, the shift of Islam. So that's where Pay Halal came in, all right? And at the same time, we addressed three issues, all right? So Pay Halal had first started as a payment gateway. Now we are generally an Islamic e-commerce payment program here. So we address three main issues, which is riba, gara, and we make sure that the transactions are not haram, right? So let's say a consumer buys goods, all right, from cross-border. So Pay Halal will be able to verify the consumer goods because we have aggregated the database from 43 countries here. So, for instance, if you buy, let's say, a pack of Milo from Australia, we verify the goods by the brand, the format, the weight, the manufacturer, and the certification expiry date. So if you pay through Pay Halal, you will get what you purchase for, which is halal. And another way where we can update our halal database is when we onboard merchants. So in Pay Halal, we believe our contribution would be in the Islamic payment space because every fintech and bank has an Islamic instrument from Islamic bank account to debit cards, and credit cards. So we saw the gap in the Islamic merchant acquiring and payment processing space. So we have a very special transaction, an akad. It's called a wakala by al-ujra, all right? So when the sale is done, it's done according to Islamic principles, all right? So we hold the whole transactions in escrow, right? We hold the money, and when the consumer is satisfied with the goods as received, they give out a GR transaction, a goods received notification. So this element will reduce the chargebacks, the brand risk, and generally the buyer and seller has been verified. So there's an element of transparency. Basically, Pay Halal underwrites the entire transaction, right? And we made sure that this added surety is given to our buyers. And one way of innovating we've done as well, we've also relooked the e-wallet, whereby we designed the Wakalah e-wallet, which is in a closed-loop merchant scheme for now. Yeah? So we are in the midst of applying an e-wallet license for an open-loop Wakalah e-wallet. Okay, and at the same time, we also have other options opened up to us, whereby we received inquiries from the Kingdom, the UAE, even from the US, to provide our payment technology as a payment software as a service for new payment systems, whereby they can check out their Pay Halal,
Let's move on to the Islamic social finance. That's part of the core of Sedekah. I want to understand a little bit about how Islamic social finance can actually be useful to bridge financing gaps and to promote sustainability for the industry.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, thank you to the organizers and good afternoon to my fellow speakers and attendees. I know to a certain extent we're talking about, matchmaking investments of social finance, but let me just address this on type of innovations that we have ourselves incorporated, and this just to show how we're able to capture. So, let's just take for Malaysia, for example. We have Malaysians who have migrated, who are living abroad, and these people, despite their current locations, they, for example, if they don't have access to any of their local credit cards or bank accounts, they still want to support Malaysians, especially in this current pandemic, right? So I've got a true story, for example, where a friend lives in the UK for so many years, and he wants to pay zakat to one of the state bodies here. But unfortunately, he's holding a UK credit card, so he ends up paying to an NGO based there. So, alhamdulillah, we are able to bridge that gap for the time being, because we have allowed multiple international currencies. And I think this is one form of innovation that has bridged that gap from global reach towards helping those on the ground. We've got access to USD, SGD transactions, and more, and we intend to increase that. And one thing that's quite unique, I would say, the innovation specific to our space, we, have this under-tapped potential, which I know there's still an ongoing discussion in regard to the whole digital assets being cryptocurrencies. But we have enabled this as a form of donations since the year 2020. And we have seen that from this community, I mean, back in those days when the value of such coins were much higher, an individual will come in, donate 0.15 for Bitcoin, and he will fully fund a campaign towards a social finance cause. And can you imagine the potential of that? And that's just a handful that we have tapped into so far. And we have gone ahead and launched a campaign, for example, to build a masjid just purely on the cryptos. So I'm just emphasizing there's a lot of opportunities out there, and I'm just focusing now on the tech innovations that is bridging the gap towards social finance in our space. I don't know the other aspects, but maybe I'll throw it back to you, Ibrahim.
Those are extremely crucial that needs to be done, which throws me back to the first item that Rani was talking about. Sometimes the market might not be able to wait. There is a pent-up demand for some of the products, but the developers, manufacturers, people like yourselves, product makers are trying to bridge that solution to the market. Do you think that the pandemic is actually slowing down these kind of items being rolled out, or do you feel that it has little to no change, Duraini?
I think actually what's interesting about the pandemic is that back to what was mentioned just now is that a lot of things are moved onto the digital platform, right? And the digital platform is actually faster than what you see in the non-digital platform or in the manual platform, which means that actually a lot of businesses are moving faster because of COVID-19. I'm not discounting that there has been victims of COVID-19, but definitely the digital platform has allowed for COVID-19 to be a bit more manageable in terms of businesses, investments, and even transactions for that matter. Now, I think what I would like to bring back here is that, for instance, what we're talking about, I mean, you mentioned just now, Ibrahim Sani, about our ETF yesterday that was listed on the Bursa Stock Exchange, and we're very honored to be here at the same time, is that what is the function of this ETF? Right, at a time when savings are depleting, we're talking about, for Malaysians, you talk about EPF withdrawals for ICNR and so forth, and there's very limited savings for the longer term. So how exactly can issuers like ourselves or platforms or digital platforms like those by Global Sadaqah and also Pay Halal facilitate, right? For instance, with our ETF, the objective is to make investments, which is largely for your own savings, accessible and cheaper. We are cutting out the middleman, or i.e. the fees that is attributed to the agency, which is normally a more human relationship touch. And because of the digital platform, we're able to convey all this information and message online digitally. And how does that benefit everyone? Number one, things are getting cheaper and you can focus your attention and your capital on things that really matter. For instance, your savings. Number two, your sedekah, your zakat. Those are very important parts of being a human being, right? And then when we relate this all back to the core or one of the concepts of this session today, which is ESG, I think earlier Tan Sri Wahid mentioned about the connection between ESG and also Shariah. What exactly are the common traits? Is actually the avoidance of harm. And the avoidance of harm is not just physical harm, it's harm in every aspect, in terms of livelihood, social, in terms of governance, pollution, and all of that. So this all brings it all back in because the digital age or the digital access allows for reduction in harm over excessive fees that has been charged in the past because we had a lot of intermediaries, and also it gives a lot of degree of transparency, which Pay Halal is trying to rectify. How are we able to identify that the sources of investments or the sources of payments or the sources of goods are in line with our faith, and which also means that it's in line with the needs of the greater good of society. So I think that's where the digital platform has really come in to facilitate this process.
So both Irfan and Indra, that
Yes.
digital platform is also quite important.
Absolutely.
The ability, the touch point is actually quite ubiquitous. People can actually move forward very quickly with you guys. Where do you think the growth of Islamic finance can jump on the bandwagon when it comes to the technology developments out there? It waits for nobody, but at the same time, you want to make sure that your products are well regulated. How do you make sure that the product rollouts is both in tandem with what the market needs, fulfills all the requirement of regulatory requirement, and at the same time hits the market very quickly.
Yeah. For me or Indra?
No, it's
Shall I
okay.
take
Maybe
that? Sure.
Ifran? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think it's very important, regardless of whichever sector, although, I'm representing social finance specifically, is that we have to be at the top of our game in terms of the, transparency. Like if we're talking now about giving funds to someone on the ground, we need to ensure, and this is where we ensure that they are verified beneficiaries, because unfortunately, there are a lot of, unfortunate scammers going around. So this is important, I think, from all sectors. And transparency is key. Like, once funds have been disbursed, what happened to it? Who has been assisted? So these are part and parcel, at least, for what we do. And I just want to touch also on the point where, Mr. Rani mentioned, the whole COVID pandemic definitely has slowed down a lot of various sectors across the globe. But for social finance, I can say for sure, at least from Global Sedekah's experience, we actually have done better than the previous years, because, I'll give a simple analogy. If you just give me a few seconds, you and I, we are now doing a lot of things digitally. We are shopping online, we're going getting our groceries online, and we get our, supplies, milk, bread, and we're done, right? If someone were to come to you or to me and say, "Hey, would you like to buy more bread or milk for the family?" You would say, "No, I've bought enough." But if someone were to come to me and you and say, "Hey, your neighbor needs some food, are you willing to buy more groceries for them?" And the answer is an absolute yes. So the thing is, I see this
Yeah.
COVID, and as she has mentioned, it has actually triggered more people to incorporate like social finance, social impact to everything they do, be it investments or be it on a day-to-day basis. So we have to really beef up our game in terms of providing the access and the reach, like I was saying, technology in terms of multiple payments. We also allow, for example, digital gold for our campaigns. We are trying to maximize our reach, and I think that's key for this particular angle.
Indra, do you agree with what Ifran was mentioning in terms of the ability for us to pick up that social
Absolutely.
element?
Yeah. To me, the pandemic was actually an accelerator in terms of e-commerce and contactless payment. Yeah, and there's something that we like to talk about. It was a digitization process, of which PayHalal tried to help in terms where we saw our customers having problems, was whereby we created a digital Amil mobile technology, and we did likewise for Korban. If I can just emphasize a little bit of those elements, which could help and assist. So in this area, we felt that technology was really an enabler, it sort of assisted the position that we were in, whereby we created a digital Amil mobile technology that allows zakat to be paid via QR and social media payments. So the issuer, like say a payor, will be given a reminder. You can get a receipt also from your PPZ, Mawib, and from my. So these are little things that we felt that could assist for institutions that collect like Mawib and PPZ. Another thing that we also got into was during the Korban season, the recent Korban season. Again, with the pandemic, although people were free to move, but there was still a lot of restraint in terms of being in contact with other people. So we had a very, this is real life as well, we had a very enterprising lady from Kluang, Johor, by the name of Cattle Queen Ranch. She has about 4,000, 5,000 cattle. So she wanted a solution in upcoming Korban and what she's going to do now, with this pandemic and what's going to happen to her sales. And so we created for her and for others as well a Korban payment with digital akad niat. So whereby it fulfills the right, you can actually select the cattle online, you can pay the money, you can make sure that you select the cattle that you want, that is not in any way deformed or blind, it's a good breed, yeah? You select the cattle that you want, you pay online, then you perform the akad niat, and a certification is actually issued to you. All this is done digitally. So this helped her. So we are always considering looking into the traditional Islamic religion payment space, even though we disrupt it, but we're giving people innovations and solutions, fintech solutions. So at the end of the day, the cake is big and fintech is an enabler. So we want people to have these options available for them. See, yeah. And we had our
since we started
zakat.
this,
Sure.
Yeah, since we
Sure.
started this panel inadvertently, we've been talking about consumer, we've been talking about retail, and of course, there's a lot of opportunities when it comes to not only Islamic finance industry, when it comes to consumer and retail. Generally speaking, there's a lot of options for us to actually think about when it comes to consumers and retail. But maybe we should perhaps even touch about the opportunities of Islamic finance amongst corporates, governments. Perhaps that will be an idea that we can also touch on in this panel. Maybe Nuraini, you got some ideas on this?
Yes, so I think this is a key message that was driven not just by Tan Sri Wahid earlier, but also by the previous panel, right? About asset owners or those in control of capital in directing the capital in the right direction. And this would be for both Sharia or even ESG. So what we are actually, the common traits that we have here is not just the Sharia part of our topic that is in common. It's also the benefit that it has to the greater good, right? I think that's where the ESG comes in. So I think what we have to remember is in 2000, probably about 12, 13 years ago, the ASEAN institutions, pension funds, and so forth were the biggest driver of the biggest change in the bond market, which was the issuance of sukuk. So if you recall, the local institutions were the big driver behind sukuk, which led to the expansion of global sukuk indices, and which also led to global sukuk and sukuk being part of the important allocation in any bond portfolio. So what happened there was because capital owners, asset owners actually took action and said, hey, this is the direction that we should take. So now that is the impact of actually asset owners, corporates, institutions taking charge. And this is where their role now is still very pivotal. So we keep on talking about Sharia from a halal or a haram perspective. But Ibrahim Sani, I've been speaking
Mm.
about this extensively. Sharia is not just about halal haram, it's also about quantitative standards that determines the quality of companies. And why companies are important is because the companies are actually sources of returns for institutions. Companies are also the ones that's providing employment to the whole country. So that's why it's very important that these quantitative measures that these companies actually observe under Sharia standards, right, is really taken into consideration. So we should be moving away from just thinking about halal sectors or excluding sin sectors and start thinking about what really does Sharia bring to the table. And I have a point on this. We were doing our ETF, and Ibrahim Sani knows about this. We keep on stressing that the standards of Sharia testing that we adopt is the international standard. And essentially what it does, it monitors the debt and also the cash level of companies that we invest in. Now, it's just like any other normal individual. If your debt levels and your cash levels are well managed, that shows that you're a responsible individual. It translates the same to a company. And when a company manages this well, that's where the quality increases, margins can be maintained, employment can be maintained, and resources can be deployed to focusing on the part of the business that will be sustainable for the company and also for returns in the longer term. So all of these different factors come into play, and I think we should start thinking that no longer Sharia is just about the halal or the haram. It really is about the quality and the quantitative layers that provides like a guideline for corporates and how they operate. And this is what I think the local pension funds and even the regional pension funds have been pushing for the past 13 years. And moving forward, they should continue doing that, incorporating the bigger agenda, which is ESG, which again, Tan Sri Wahid mentioned, is about the common good, about avoiding harm, right? Environmental, social, and governance as well. The pandemic has really shown something that is quite stressful, that corporates were not ready. So even if we were Sharia compliant in our practices or based on the quantitative measures, were we ready to actually tackle the pandemic, and and what does it do to the society as a whole? So I think that's probably what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The issue is we'll probably never be ready. I mean, who's ready to accept or work under a pandemic situation? Who is ever ready to roll out some products that would be revolutionary during its time? Suku was part of that, right? In the early noughties,
Mm.
and it was a tough time trying to push forward Suku product across the globe. Maybe Malaysia we're a little bit familiar, but imagine going to markets with poor regulatory requirements like Indonesia, like Bahrain, it's a tough thing to push forward, which brings about that whole notion of how do we capture the consumer or the customer size, right? Because it doesn't matter if we think about corporates or retailers or consumers. The idea here is, if we focus on just the Muslim market, then okay, we have a ready-made market of whatever 1 point something billion. But if the product is ubiquitous and the product can be used by everyone, and that we are not just selling on the halal haram element, but more of the QC element, that would
Mhm.
reach far greater implications. Maybe Ifran, you can help me on this one. Do you think that that kind of ubiquitous kind of element would help push forward for social finance? Doesn't matter whether or not it's Islamic or not, just social
Yeah,
finance
yeah,
at large.
absolutely. I mean, call it whatever you want. You want to call it like a Qard Hassan, you want to call it interest-free loan or something. But the bottom line is, at least I can give an example. Entrepreneurs now are not able to access like conventional type of financing. I'm not saying like conventional Islamic versus like financing for their businesses.
Yeah,
And for
the
me, there shouldn't
traditional
be
way.
any sort of like traditional, yeah, that better term there. So the thing is, we've got a campaign which we just launched, where it's a very straightforward idea, and it doesn't have to be restricted to any particular race, religion. It's just we are matchmaking funds towards a Qard Hassan. Call it interest-free loan if you want. We are matchmaking these individuals to ready manufacture our products, and they are using it as a capital to become an agent for this product, and they will eventually, build up their income, and they will repay. And once they repay the interest-free loan, it helps the next group of people, and it will just continue and continue. And I think no one would say that's a bad idea. I think they will agree this is actually a good idea, and it benefits all. So I think connecting that to getting more support, I don't foresee a lot of corporate institutions willing to go down the route of like offering Qard Hassan because there's no profit element and such. But for those who are already giving out one-off like CSR funds or whatever funds, try to consider like these kind of instruments where your impact could be even triple, quadruple, 5 times just from the same initial amount. And as you said, Ibrahim, these kind of things, it's not specific to any particular group. It serves the nation, and of course, the bigger globe if you expand this idea out. And I mean, if you don't mind me adding
Indra,
to that, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
No, because there are many areas where we can garner support for long-term multi-generational benefits. We want to call it wakaf, fine. But if I want to build a well in a rural area where they have to walk 2 kilometers to get water, nobody's going to say no to that. Everyone can benefit, even an ant can benefit from the water, even animals can benefit. So these kind of things, we have to really expand the reach by saying, this is a well, this is the sea ambulance. People on this island get medical help if they don't get this boat to transport them. Contribute to this boat, call it the sea ambulance. You don't have to call it wakaf, or whatever you want to call it. We have building an LPG equivalent of petrol station. This is going to sustain the income of the community so they don't depend on handouts anymore. You're right. Universal will definitely bridge the gap.
That's a very important point to add, actually, Ifran. But Indra, same question to you, but you're in a little bit more interesting position because what how ubiquitous can you get if you think about payment solutions and fintech. My worry is that this is, I don't know how blue ocean this situation is, the industry that you're operating in, and then you have big incumbents. I don't know, Mastercard, Visa, something like that. They're also rolling out Shariah products. Do you think that a company like Pay Halal can actually conquer that kind of space, particularly when it comes to the product services that you can roll out? It's actually quite universal. Anybody can use it.
Actually wanted to say something on what Irfan said, but never mind. He's already covered it, which was really great on Qard
Yeah.
Hassan. Which I think
I apologize for stealing your thoughts. But
No. It's great because I thought that we were working on a Qard Hassan crowdfunding platform for women entrepreneurs because we found a gap.
I mean, it's a coincidence. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's a
No
great
coincidence.
platform. So
Our
it's
first
completely,
campaign is it's a woman entrepreneur by the name of Azura. You can see it on our
yes,
website, and we're helping her to
yeah,
brilliant stuff. Brilliant. Looking forward to seeing that too.
yeah. We're looking
Okay.
forward as well
Then the
to
next
seeing
question
that
is,
take off.
all right. The next question is a bit tied to what Taufik Iskandar was mentioning earlier. I find it very interesting that he's putting it out there as plain as it is. We all want to make money. We are all capitalist in nature. And while we want to exhibit or extol some ideas of charity and think of finance maybe as one element of it, but at the end of the day, we want to earn, not just for ourselves, or because we are custodians of the entities that we are running, and all of this is actually profit making. How do you balance
Mhm.
in terms of trying to capture the opportunities within Islamic finance while trying to manage that whole profit element and not profiteering at the end of the day? I don't know whether anybody, any of my panel wants to take up this question, but feel free. Anybody, just put up your hand and we'll pass it to you.
Can I give an example? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bernie. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, Raini first,
Sure.
Dura.
So yeah, balancing is very interesting, right? We talk about financial returns versus the more subjective returns, right? So actually, if you look at the articles of association or memorandum of association, most of the companies in Malaysia, their targets are mainly profit driven. They do not talk about ESG. All these concepts, new concepts that we talk about now, is does not exist. Now, what I think we need to be fair about is the fact that this is actually a constant evolution. We are now taught it in a big way because there are all these global indices that have set ESG standards. So Ibrahim, now you would know that Dow Jones, S&P, MSCI, they all have their own ESG standards, right? And they determine what are the standards that we need to observe in order to qualify. Now, but what we need to also understand is that every jurisdiction, right, has its own quirks and its own traits. You cannot be blanketing the needs or the standards of just ESG across everyone the same way. For instance, I give you this, yeah. Indonesia, one of the biggest driver of the economy other than consumption is actually the coal sector. The coal sector drives loans, drives employment, drives GDP. So you're talking about ESG standards saying, hey, this is completely unacceptable, right? So what then happens to the entire ecosystem that has been living off this sector? Now, is this an overnight thing? It isn't. So that's why I say everything about balancing between financial returns and also doing the right thing must also be taken into consideration with the ecosystem or the jurisdiction that you are operating within. As universal or as flat as the world is getting right now, it is not as simple. I've also spoken quickly about this some time back on what China recently is doing. The biggest news probably shaking global markets is regulatory activism. So one of the biggest sector that was hit in China was actually the after school tutoring segment. So you imagine you have day school and in the evening you go for tuition classes. So this is a very big sector driving a lot of revenue. But of late, recently over the weekend, the government has banned that sector. Why? Because what that sector has essentially done by overcharging the services is that it has increased the disparity between the poor and the rich. They have stopped or reduced accessibility to educational support to the poor. So then the government comes in to interject. But what does that do? That takes away profit making capabilities, right, for that sector. So now this is also where the government plays a role, government, institutions, regulation. This is not a one solution fit all and then you have a target to meet and then you hit that target and you move on. No, it actually will evolve. 30 years ago in Malaysia, you don't hear about, you get really excited about CPO. That's when the CPO sector is developing. We were also one of the biggest CPO producers in the world, right? And 30 years later, we're talking about observing RSPO standards in order to be high quality CPO producing companies. So these things, like I said, is it's a balancing act, and we as asset managers, like value partners, investors like our institutions, and also companies must also know what are the limits. And the key document that regulates this or guides this for a company is actually the Memorandum of Association and Article of Association, and that is the core document that we need to go back to. And of course, Ibrahim, and I would not dispute that the institutions who are the big investors in these segments, they must also be able to educate or to advise on how to draw the line between profit targets or financial targets and also social ESG targets, which are a bit more subjective in nature.
Ifran, you wanted to add just now?
Yeah, I was just going to share like some examples where there's a coupling of returns and that a social finance element. So it just goes to say that people do want a balance of that at times. I know there's some pure, like, I just want to invest and that's it. I just want to donate and that's it. So I'll give an example where this happened recently. So there was a development of a community-driven token from the crypto community. And I'm not going to go into detail. I don't too much about this, but what I understand, there is an element of rewards for the holder. And there's another element that provides donation. And alhamdulillah, that went to one of campaigns on Global Sedekah. And the thing is, a lot of people came in worldwide because it's something that combined both elements, which is something that you were mentioning also. And although I'm more representing Global Sedekah today, if you are aware, we're part of a bigger group where there are investment platforms also. And it's always been part of the group DNA, like our various other parts of the world, where even though there is some profit element to the investments, there's always a social impact element in that actual issuance. For example, be it a P2P issuance providing social housing in Indonesia, and I do have something that is more of a preview or something that we are working on, but I'm not going to reveal too much, but it's pretty much tying up investments towards underdeveloped, be it government or Waqf land. And I think that's something that would attract people when you have some element of returns, but there's also a bigger social impact. So I agree. We don't have to always separate it all the time. Yeah. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ibrahim.
Sorry, I think I have to still keep on Ifran because there are two questions.
Okay.
I think both are quite pointedly directed to you, actually. First is, of course, how
Okay.
would you encourage funder to fund Kart Hassan given no profit is involved? What would be some of the biggest challenge to roll out this in scale?
Understood. Okay, so I just want to address that who we are actually reaching out to. There are a lot of people out there, corporates, individuals, who are giving out one-off donations anyway, be it to feed the poor, be it to whichever campaign, build something. So I'm reaching out to the same audience, be it the corporates, and I'm telling them, you have already set your budget for this year, whatever CSR funds, to give out for a one-off donation to help someone. And if you give out one-off donation, that's just going to be the end of it. But consider for this particular same set of funds that you intended to give out anyway, without expecting anything in return, channel it towards a Qad Hassan campaign, or for example, ours. And the Qad Hassan element will happen after that. It doesn't come back to the initial, because the person is going to give it away as a donation anyway. But we are saying that this will maximize your impact from an initial 10,000 ringgit that you intended to give. It will be a one-off, and that's it. The person consume it, done. But if we give it and we tell them this amount, when you return it, it's going to pay it forward to the next group of entrepreneurs, and we, of course, with some set conditions and such, being Qad Hassan a bit riskier. So this is one. I hope it answers your question, because we're not targeting a whole different audience. It's just the same audience who are already giving, but I say, hey, why don't you consider giving to this instead? And of course, the biggest challenge, we are dealing with humans, and humans being humans. We all come from the finance industry. I was there once. Even when there was a whole carrot and more of a stick element, people do default for various reasons. And if you're going to tell them it's Qad Hassan from the beginning, if you know the nature, there's no late penalty, there's no interest, there's no compounding and such. That is that challenge that people won't repay. But we are trying to explore and see whether humans will also surprise us and will not resort to that, because they feel like a bigger responsibility of helping others when they repay. Of course, if they have no choice, they're really suffering, then we just have to wave it off. This is just the nature of a Qad Hassan. And was there a second question? Do you want me to read it off myself? Or
No,
are you gonna ask?
same, I guess. How do you bridge,
Okay.
for you, I'll use it this way,
Mm.
as is. How do you bridge Wakaf and foundation when the thinking of Wakaf is still faith-based? The permutation to this question is,
Yeah.
for Dura and Indra, is on the products sometimes have a preconceived notion of what it is,
Yep.
and how do you educate that market?
Yep.
That is the
Yep.
second half of the question. But Ifran, you can
Yeah.
take it as is.
Yeah. I think I partially addressed it earlier. I mean, you can call it whatever you want. The thing is, be it a Court Hassan, you can call it interest-free microfinancing loan. The bottom line, an entrepreneur is going to get cash to build her business, for example. So the thing is, it wouldn't matter in the end to the contributor, and it wouldn't matter to the receiver of the loan. I can tell them like, excuse me, this is for you to help you with the business. Thank you. I don't have to say, oh, this is a Qor Hassan, Qor, Qor means this in Arabic. We don't have to go to that extent. And likewise for Waqaf, giving that example, for example, we've built a few wells in various parts in the rural areas where, as I mentioned, 2 kilometers to get water. I don't even have to call it waqf. Like I just tell them we are building a well to provide water, and here's a video of the villagers who are thanking you for it. I don't think anyone would say no to that. So I think that's how we bridge it. Like if we really want to expand our reach, like we just tell them like this is serving humanity, regardless of whatever religion. You're going to need water, and if we build this well, there's no restriction. Only X Y Z can drink from this well. And I think that's some of the examples, and I'm sure we can be more creative with that. Like as I mentioned, sea ambulance. You want to talk about a van or a bus, but of course, this is where we need to change the mindset that Waqf doesn't always have to be like build a masjid, here's my land, take it and do something with it. There's so many ways that we can expand on that idea. And I think this is the bridge, inshallah.
Dora, you want
Maybe
to
I
add
will
it?
add to that. Yeah, I'm going to add to that. It's quite interesting because what I see here is actually the issue, right? So when you insert languages like words like wakaf, right, it looks like it's a very
Mm-hmm.
religious concept.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why when
Mm-hmm.
we talk about investments Sharia compliant, Ibrahim has seen me talk about it so many times. I stress so
Mm-hmm.
much more on the quality of the companies that all these different financial ratios churn out.
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially, what we want is a universal, we want it to be universally known and understood that the Sharia concept is not just exclusive for Muslim community who understands the word Sharia and Islamic, but it goes
Mm-hmm.
beyond that, right? I will reiterate this again. This is something that I said just now: is that I keep on focusing, or we keep on focusing on the quantitative tests, which in our fundraising activities we keep on educating the public on, is so that they understand we are looking at good companies for you to invest in, not just halal companies, because a halal company doesn't mean it's a good company. It just means it's
Mm-hmm.
halal from the sector, right? And that's what I think we need to start doing in instead of making Sharia concepts to be very isolated and exclusive to the Muslim 1.5 billion of us all over the world community. We should start making it a very universal concept.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we are quite happy with the issuance of our ETF is, whilst it is called Sharia because we need to actually name it in the product, but we keep on stressing on the fact that we have 100 quality stocks. Quality is what Sharia
Yep.
concepts should represent. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just want to add to
Um,
that point. Sorry. No, because I want to say,
Go on.
although generally for the more universal approach, we might want to drop those terms, but we can't deny that sometimes those terms, it does appeal to a certain audience. Like, for example, when you say waqf and you go to some of our donors from Middle East, they easily would just say like, okay, I want to give 100,000 to a waqf. And it has happened. So we have to have the balance, but you're right. Having things Sharia compliant, it should by default mean quality. I agree with you. Thank you.
Another area that I want to explore is on the product innovation aspect. We've seen how during the pandemic, product innovation, this is my personal view, product
Mhm.
innovation wasn't that clear. What was clear is that streamlining of solutions became quite apparent. Processes that were taking longer became streamlined. Things that could have taken 10 steps now would take 2 steps. That kind of improvement of efficiency across the sectors, across industries, across the way we work, all that came about during the pandemic. Do you guys agree with this view of mine in terms of the efficiency was increased during the pandemic rather than the innovation aspect of it? And I open this question to the floor.
Yeah, I can take that. Actually, I disagree, Ibrahim. I find that under stressful circumstances, when businesses are challenged, when the market is uncertain, you become efficient, but you also innovate. And that's also, because we highlighted about our product and we actually launched an ETF, the first in the world, the first in the world ETF that invests in Sharia compliant China A companies. We did it entirely from home. So we did it efficiently and we did something completely new, first in the world. So it's very difficult for me to say, yes, there is a segregation. But of course, this goes back to corporate culture, to leadership, to maybe the agility of your organization. And that is something that I have been blessed with in leading the organization in achieving this. But yes, there is a bit of, I think, disruption to innovation, not in terms of the product, but people are more innovating in the means of accessing consumers. So before MCO 2020, we didn't have or extensively use things like BIP, and the payment on Grab was a bit different, and now it is becoming a bit more of an important mechanism or intermediary. Same goes to investments prior to MCO 2020, when you can walk into a branch and talk to your remisier, you could easily buy a stock. Then now you're doing it all via your app. So maybe innovation of product is not there, but innovation of processes is actually still ongoing. And probably that's what Indra and also Ifran can explain more on.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
go
mean,
ahead.
definitely efficiency improved, but I think a lot of our, at least internally, our innovations definitely happened throughout the COVID period. And I've already mentioned some of those, like, allowing people from various countries to see their own transactions in their own local currencies. That was done just, within this year or so. And that was an innovation which we put it like, on our platform, and even the whole, enabling cryptocurrencies, that also happened within the year or so. And I suppose, maybe we had the advantage of being a bit agile in terms of what we wanted to switch. I mean, I can share an example of an idea. It's not a big idea, but it really made a difference for some. Going back to my analogy of, like, grocery shopping and such, likewise, sometimes people reach a stage where I've donated enough. I've already donated enough for this well, for example. So overnight, one of the advisors just asked us, can we have a function where people can dedicate their donations to someone else? And we just said, yeah, and it was just developed overnight, like a switch of a finger, like a flip. So literally the following day, people who had already said, I've donated enough myself, but now they can't say no to, like, I want to donate to Ibrahim, that now you have a share in this well, which I've already had enough myself. And it came as a nice, pleasant gift. Dear Ibrahim at whatever gmail.com, Ifran has donated X amount to this well. And that happened overnight for us. And we are already in talks to build a blockchain-based platform. So that I think that's going to be an innovation that a lot of people would appreciate. We are adding more currencies, so it should be more than 10 international currencies, more than 44 cryptocurrencies, and we also are working towards a mobile app. So I like to say, maybe not so in terms, at least in my own personal experience, we did innovate quite a bit the past year or so, but I'm sure maybe on the bigger picture, there were some restrictions. As Durrani mentioned, a lot of us were working from home. So I guess we took the opportunity to make it easier for people to sadaqah from home. So we took that upon ourselves. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to closing statements. Maybe,
Sure.
sorry, Indra, you wanted to say something?
Sorry, yeah. So just something about a short pointer. Yeah, for Pay Halal, in terms of our merchant acquiring process, we made it very simple for our merchants. Not so much the mid tier and the top tier, but more on the bottom tier. Our cottage entrepreneurs, those who needed a foot in. We're very inclusive. We don't leave those entrepreneurs out. So our merchant program, we made it very easy, a very 3-step onboarding process for them. In terms of, they just had to mention who they are. We just needed to know KYB, KYC, their product sold, business registration. So we underwrote the risk. We made sure that if there was a transaction cost, we just removed it. So we made it as easy as possible for them to be onboarded, because we always had this company policy of making sure that we didn't leave anybody who wanted to get on board in e-commerce or any payment left behind. So this is one of which where we tried out to assist our merchants. But of course, the mid-tiers and the top tiers, like our Takafu companies, they were fine because they were already on board. So we gave them customizable dashboards, catalogs, halal checkouts, sales data, account reconciliations. These were very important for them in order in times to come in future that they could actually get a bank loan with all these data that they process through the Pay Halal, you see. So in that little way, we tried to help the merchants at the base scale. Yeah.
All right. Clearly, I was wrong. Okay, so the three panelists have
But just the three of us.
a sweepstakes of sorts. Let's move on
gang up against
to
Ibrahim.
closing statements. Maybe we can start with Ifran, and then we move back to Indra and then Duraini before we end the panel. Ifran.
So, the current situation is going to continue for quite a while. And I think it's up to us, anyone in this space, to continue to make things easier for people, be it you innovate in terms of channels of supporting, or you come up with an investment product that also has a social finance element. Because I'm just speaking from my experience or what I see on the ground, there's still a lot of people who need help. So we can do it a traditional way, but we're still stuck in our homes. We have to incorporate technology to really support this particular space. And this is something that I think we are trying our little best to add more technology to make it easier, from point A to point Z for you to help anyone around the world. And I'm not just talking about just Malaysia itself. We are suffering, but there are people out there who are, suffering even more. But I think we need to be the ones to champion this cause. So I look forward to, any additional points from any of the panelists or any of the attendees. You've got ideas that we can work towards, that we can collaborate on. I'm throwing ideas. If you know ways to grab the youth, you want to gamify the whole concept of social finance, I'm open to that. We are working towards getting a platform of blockchain. There might be other things that we're missing out that we should be focusing on first. Let's have that chat. Thank you.
Indra?
Sure. So to me, the core pandemic that's just happened, it's so important that we have fair financial dealings, and we always improve social justice. And money is there to help, to assist, to bless. It's not to oppress. I always believe that, and that is my philosophy. And I always see that in Islamic finance. I see that coming out from Islamic finance. And innovation and bringing forth tools from these basic principles of Islam it's just amazing what we can do for the future, because fintech is an ocean, Islamic finance is an ocean. Islamic philanthropy market's about 2.4 trillion. So that's ample room for us to grow and to move and to help and to bless, at the same time to also make a good living, So it's a balance. To me, it's always a balance. It's not exploitative in any way. It's not one over the other. It's a balance. And it's always good to give. And that's why I truly believe in Islamic finance. So we have a lot more that we can give. And we hope that more, unicorns and entrepreneurs, Islamic fintech entrepreneurs come out from Malaysia. And the country continues to nurture growth in this sector.
Okay. Duraini?
Okay, on capital market perspective, I guess what this pandemic has shown is that actually Sharia principles are more universal than we actually thought it was. Just from what Ifran and Indra has been sharing and our own experiences, we no longer are talking about ESG as being a or ESG, which is environment, social and governance standards, being a separate concept, and Sharia is actually closely intertwined and it's complementary of one another, and we should start actually leveraging on that these principles for us, for Islam or Sharia principles that has existed for the past 1,400 years is actually more applicable today. It sets the standards for financial prudence. It also sets the standards for social harmony. China is probably one of the countries that's trying to balance that very well. And as Muslim business owners, investors, as asset owners from Muslim-dominated regions or countries, we should start playing our part in educating the world about how Sharia is more has been more universal than ever. I think I'll close it at that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good way to end. Thanks to the panel for sharing insightful conversation. There seems to be a lot, really a lot more potential in the realm of Islamic finance. We now have to end this panel to move on with next session, which is to talk about the market outlook for the second half of this year.